Today we'll be continuing with topic 9, and we're doing simplifying complex fractions. Before we get into that, we should probably talk about what a complex fraction is. And basically, a complex fraction is a fraction that has fractions in the numerator and or denominator. Another way to say this is that it's basically a fraction inside a fraction. And that's considered complex, which means that we can't have that. We have to actually simplify so that we no longer have fraction or fractions inside another fraction. And there are multiple ways to eliminate the fractional part in a complex fraction. Sometimes you can do number 1, which is multiply by the reciprocal, and that's usually when you have one term over another term. So one term over one term, you can multiply by the reciprocal. But sometimes, unfortunately, number 1 is not an option, so we have to go to number 2, which is multiplying every single term by the LCD. So this will all make sense when I show you guys examples. But like I said, the whole point of this is to eliminate any fractions inside the fraction. So if you have a fraction in the numerator, you have to eliminate that. If you have a fraction in the denominator, you need to eliminate that. If you have fractions in both the numerator and the denominator, you have to eliminate both. Okay, so let's get started with number 1, example number 1. So take a look at what we have. So the issue here is that we have this one big fraction, right, that has a numerator and a denominator. And if you look in the numerator, we have 2 fractions in the numerator. And if you look at the denominator, we have 1 fraction in the denominator. And overall, this is one big fraction. So this is a complex fraction. So this is not okay, and we have to simplify and eliminate the fractions. Now, if we go back to the notes, and by the way, if you didn't jot these down, I would pause this video and make sure you jot them down in your notes. If we look at number 1, the first method is to multiply by the reciprocal. However, it's not going to work over here because we have 2 terms over 2 terms. Multiplying by the reciprocal only works when you have 1 term over 1 term. So you might want to add that to your notes. So our second option is to multiply every single term by the LCD. Okay, so before we do anything, let's find our LCD. So let's see. Okay, so let's take a look at all our fractions. Now, this one I can actually rewrite as 1 over 1. And I'm going to do that just so that we see what fractions we have, 1 over 1. Okay, so the first fraction is 1 over x, so the denominator x is x. Second fraction is x over y, so the denominator is y. Here the denominator is y, and here the denominator is 1. So 1 we don't have to worry about because 1 times anything gives you whatever that thing is. So we don't really need to include the 1. But what we do need to include among all our fractions is both of these fractions have a y, and then this fraction has an x. So we need a y and an x. So our LCD is xy. Okay? Good. Now, after you get your LCD, you're going to take that LCD and multiply every single term by that LCD. And it's going to be a long process at first because you might want to write it all out so you don't get confused. But here's what I mean. So we're going to take our 1 over x and multiply that by xy. Now, xy just means xy over 1. Okay, so that's what I'm doing with this. And then I have a plus, so then x over y. And I'm going to multiply that by my LCD, which is xy over 1. Okay, and if you want, just put this over 1 so you know where it's coming from. All over 1 over y times xy over 1 plus 1 over 1 times xy over 1. All right, good. So now let's simplify. Now remember, the whole point of this is that we eliminate the fractions, so we should be able to eliminate using this method. Okay, so let's see. Here we're going to have xy over x, because we have 1 times xy and x times 1, okay, plus here we're going to have x times xy, so that's x squared y over y, all over, here we're going to have 1 over y times xy over 1, so that's going to be xy over y. Okay, and here nothing changes here, we're just going to have xy over 1. Okay, very good. Now things are going to cross out. I hope you noticed that. So let me show you. The x and x here cancel. Here the y and y cancel. Here the y and y cancel. And here this is just xy. So if I were to rewrite this, I'm going to end up with y plus x squared, right? All over, okay, well, what do we have here? We have an x, and then we have an xy. And take a look at that, guys. We have eliminated any fractions inside the fraction. We still have this one big fraction, right? We have a numerator and a denominator. But we were able to eliminate any fractions we had. So that's your goal. Now, I don't want to see you guys cross things out when they are part of a term. So for example, you cannot cross this y out with this y, because this is a quantity, y plus x squared, so it's glued together, and you cannot cancel the y with the y or this x with this x squared. So just be careful. Okay, so that was example 1. So just to go over the method again, in case you are having trouble with this, because it can be a little bit confusing. The first step is to see if you can multiply by the reciprocal, but like I said, usually to multiply by the reciprocal, you have to have one term over one term. And in this case, we have 2 terms over 2 terms. So we had to go with method number 2, which is find your LCD, then multiply every single term, every single piece by the LCD. So 1 over x got multiplied by xy over 1, xy got multiplied by xy over 1, 1 over y got multiplied by xy over 1, and 1 over 1 got multiplied by xy over 1. And if you do this correctly, you should end up with an answer that doesn't have fractions in the numerator or denominator. Okay, let's go on to example 2. Okay, here's our example. Again, this is not one term over one term, so we're going to have to go with method 2 again. So let's start by getting our LCD. Okay, so if you want, rewrite things as fractions so you could see, so the x is technically x over 1, right? And so there's a 1 in this denominator, but we don't have to worry about a 1 when finding our LCD. Here I have an x in the denominator, here I have a y, so my LCD is just xy. Okay, so let's do what we did before, which is take every single piece and multiply by xy, in this case over 1. Okay, so the top is going to be x over 1 times xy over 1. That's for the top. The denominator is going to be, hold on guys, I zoomed in somehow. Okay. So xy over 1. That's for the top. The bottom, so 1 over x, I got to multiply that by xy over 1. So 1 over x times xy over 1 plus 1 over y, I have to multiply that by xy over 1. All right, let's see what we have up top. So up top, we're going to have x times xy. So that's going to give us x squared y over 1 technically, but I don't need to put that. That's going to complicate things for no reason. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to start crossing things out without rewriting things over and over again. So if I multiply these two, you can tell that there's an x on top and x on the bottom. So what's going to happen is these x's are going to cancel, and you're just going to be left with 1 times y over 1, which is just y. Okay, good. Plus, this is looking good because I don't see any fractions. Here, what happens here is this x, y, and then there's a y on the bottom. So this y in the numerator and y in the denominator will cancel, and you're going to be left with 1 times x over 1, which is just x. Okay? All right, and we're done, actually, because as you can see, we no longer have any fractions. Okay, so this would be our answer for example 2. All right, let's take a look at an example where you can actually just multiply by the reciprocal. I'll show you both methods here. So let's say this is method 1, and then I'll show you method 2. Okay, so let's multiply by the reciprocal. Multiplying by the reciprocal. All right, so I'll just put this up here. I'm not going to need too much space for this one. All right, so when you're dividing one term by another term, what you can do, so we're allowed to use method 1 here because it's one term over one term, right? So I'm going to keep my first fraction. Actually, I'm just going to rewrite this. 1/3 divided by 3 over b. So I'm just writing it horizontally. Instead of using the division line, I'm using the division symbol and writing it horizontally. Okay, but remember that dividing by a fraction is the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. So remember, we could do this. We can multiply by the reciprocal. So it's going to be 1/3 times, and then flip your second fraction. B over 3. So what does that give us? 1 times b on top is b. 3 times 3 is 9, so it's b over 9 is our final answer. Okay, so that was method 1. You see how easy method 1 is, but unfortunately we can't use it all the time. We can only use it when we have one term divided by another term. I want to show you that we get the same answer if we use method 2. So same problem, let's just use method 2, which is multiplying by the LCD. Okay, so let's take our problem again. Okay, so our problem was 1/3 divided by 3 over b. Okay, let's find our LCD as usual. So here I have a 3 and here I have a b, so my LCD is 3b. Okay, what's nice about this is I'm just going to do the multiplication right over here because we only have one term in the numerator and one term in the denominator. Remember, you could put this over 1 to help you. So multiply each term by 3b over 1. Okay, up top, things will cancel. The 3, use other colors. 3 and 3 will cancel. Here, the b and b will cancel. Okay, so up top, what do I have? 1 times b over 1, which is just b. At the bottom, I have 3 times 3 over 1, so that's just 9. So my final answer is b over 9. And if you notice, we got the same thing up top by using method 1. Okay, so I do recommend that when you have one term divided by one term, just use method 1. It's a lot faster, as you can see here. We basically got it in one step. Here it took a little bit more work, so why create more work for yourself when you can just multiply by the reciprocal? But remember, that can only be used when you have one term divided by one term. Okay, I think I have 2 more examples for you. And guys, for any of these, I recommend that in order to get practice, I recommend you pause the video and try some of these out yourselves before seeing how I do it, just to kind of test yourself on understanding. Okay, so for this one, we don't have one term divided by one term. We have one term up top, but not at the bottom. So we're going to have to use method 2. So that takes us back to finding our LCD. Again, 3, remember, is the same thing as 3 over 1. So looking at the denominator of 3, we have a 1. So that's not really going to affect our LCD. Here we have an x in the denominator, and this is plus y, which is technically y over 1. So our LCD is actually just going to be x. Okay, so let's multiply the top by x and each piece of the denominator by x. So 2 over x times x over 1. Remember, you can always put it over 1. Plus y over 1 times x over 1. Okay? So all I did is I multiplied every single term by x. So 3 times x, that's where I got that from. Then 2 over x times x, so 2 over x times x over 1. And then y over 1 technically times x over 1. Okay? So up top I have a 3x, easy. At the bottom, my x's will cancel, so I'll be left with a 2 over 1, so just a 2, plus, and then this second piece here is just y times x over 1. So that's the same thing as xy if I put it in alphabetical order. Okay? And that's your final answer. Again, these x's, this x and this x cannot cancel because this is technically, 2 plus xy is technically a quantity that's, you can think of it as it's glued together, so you can't separate the pieces. Okay? Unless you factor something out, but there's nothing we can factor. All right, so that's the answer for number 4. All right, and I have one last one, so this is the final problem for today's lesson. Okay, so again, we need to find our LCD here. Let's see. So this is this denominator is an x minus 4, so I'm definitely going to need an x minus 4. This denominator has an x minus 4, but I already added that to my LCD, and this is just 1 over 1, so we don't need to worry about 1. So my LCD is x minus 4. All right, let's multiply everything by our LCD. Now this is going to look a little bit more complicated, so let's write it out. So 3 over x minus 4, and let me multiply by x minus 4 over 1. Okay, so that's the top. Okay, all over. And then the denominator is 1 over 1. Okay, that's better actually. 1 over 1. Hold on, guys, sorry. Times x minus 4 over 1. All right, so that's the first part. Minus 2 over x minus 4 times x minus 4 over 1. Okay, so that looks a little confusing, but what I want you to do is look at the purple writing. So here, here, and here. All I'm doing is I'm taking every single term and multiplying it by my LCD. So the top gets multiplied by x minus 4 over 1, the 1 here gets multiplied by x minus 4 over 1, and the 2 over x minus 4 gets multiplied by x minus 4 over 1. Okay, so the colors, I think, help you see what's going on. All right, so what this answer is going to look like is the following. The x minus 4's here will cancel. So up top, you're just going to have a 3 over 1, which is just a 3. Here, nothing will cancel. It's just going to be x minus 4 times 1 over 1. So that's just x minus 4. Then we have a minus, so let's put that down. And then here, the x minus 4 will cancel with the x minus 4, and you're going to be left with the 2. Okay, so our final answer then, if we combine like terms in the denominator, would be x and then negative 4 minus 2, x minus 6. And so this is our answer. Okay, so I definitely think you should go through these carefully, maybe rewatch some parts if you are confused, but it's pretty straightforward once you find your LCD. I know you guys don't really like fractions though, so I'm sure this will be a little bit difficult for some people, but it'll just require extra practice. All right? Make sure to let me know if you guys have any questions, and then I'll see you guys later.